Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest reunited the central cast of The Curse of the Black Pearl, while greatly expanding the number of important characters surrounding them. By 2006, the franchise was no longer considered the risky pirate experiment it had been before the first film. Its stars had become internationally recognizable, and the sequel gave them an opportunity to deepen characters who had already captured the imagination of audiences around the world. Johnny Depp returned as Captain Jack Sparrow, the role that had transformed an already respected career into global superstardom. Long before Pirates of the Caribbean, Depp had deliberately built a reputation for unusual and unpredictable choices. After becoming famous through the television series 21 Jump Street, he moved toward unconventional films such as Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood, Donnie Brasco, Sleepy Hollow, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Rather than establishing himself as a conventional action hero, Depp became associated with eccentric outsiders and characters who existed on the edges of society. Captain Jack Sparrow brought these qualities into a massive adventure franchise. Depp created Jack as a strange combination of pirate, trickster, comedian, survivor, and reluctant hero. His loose physical movements, unusual speech patterns, suspicious expressions, and unpredictable reactions made the character immediately distinctive. In Dead Man's Chest, Depp had the difficult task of repeating what audiences loved without simply copying his performance from the first film. Jack therefore becomes more desperate and morally uncertain. His debt to Davy Jones places him in genuine fear, allowing Depp to reveal vulnerability underneath the comedy. The success of Dead Man's Chest strengthened Jack Sparrow's position as one of Depp's defining characters. The film became a worldwide blockbuster, and Depp received another Academy Award nomination for his performance. By this stage, an eccentric character that might once have seemed unsuitable for a major studio production had become the central attraction of one of the largest franchises in cinema. Orlando Bloom returned as Will Turner at a remarkable point in his career. Bloom had already achieved worldwide recognition as Legolas in the Lord of the Rings trilogy before appearing as Will in the first Pirates film. He then appeared in major productions including Troy and Kingdom of Heaven. By the time Dead Man's Chest arrived, he was strongly associated with historical adventures, fantasy worlds, sword fighting, and heroic characters. Will Turner could easily have become a straightforward romantic hero, but the sequel gives Bloom darker and more personal material. Will begins the story determined to save Elizabeth and complete the mission forced upon him, but his discovery that his father, Bootstrap Bill Turner, is trapped aboard the Flying Dutchman changes his priorities. Bloom brings sincerity to the role and provides an important contrast to Depp. Jack survives through improvisation and deception, while Will is driven by loyalty, love, and an increasingly complicated sense of duty. Keira Knightley returned as Elizabeth Swann after experiencing an extraordinary rise in international recognition. Before the Pirate series, she had attracted attention through films such as Bend It Like Beckham. The first Pirates movie introduced her to an enormous worldwide audience, while Pride and Prejudice demonstrated her dramatic abilities and earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Dead Man's Chest allows Knightley to move Elizabeth further away from the traditional image of the protected governor's daughter. Elizabeth becomes increasingly independent, physically adventurous, and morally complicated. She disguises herself, negotiates with pirates, participates directly in dangerous situations, and learns to manipulate people when necessary. Knightley balances the romantic side of Elizabeth with a growing desire for freedom. Her chemistry with both Bloom and Depp also becomes important because the sequel deliberately introduces uncertainty into Elizabeth's emotions. Bill Nighy joined the series as Davy Jones and delivered one of its most memorable performances. Before the film, Nighy had enjoyed a long career in British theatre, television, and cinema, with films such as Love Actually bringing him wider international recognition. Davy Jones required a very different type of performance because the finished character would be heavily transformed through visual effects. Nighy's work provided the human foundation beneath the digital creation. His distinctive voice, controlled movements, bitterness, and strange elegance prevent Davy Jones from becoming merely a computer-generated monster. Beneath the tentacles and supernatural appearance is a wounded man whose cruelty developed from emotional suffering. The role introduced Nighy to an even larger global audience and became one of the most recognizable characters of his career. Stellan Skarsgård entered the story as bootstrap Bill Turner, Will's long-lost father. Already an accomplished actor with an extensive European and international career, Skarsgård had appeared in films including Breaking the Waves, Good Will Hunting, Ronin, and King Arthur. He brought emotional weight to a character surrounded by fantasy. Bootstrap is physically becoming part of the Flying Dutchman, yet Skarsgård makes his tragedy feel human. His scenes with Bloom give the sequel an important father and son relationship and provide Will with a motivation extending beyond his romance with Elizabeth. Tom Hollander also joined the principal cast as Lord Cutler Beckett. Hollander had built a strong reputation through British film, television, and theatre, appearing in projects including Gosford Park and Pride and Prejudice. Beckett is deliberately different from the supernatural villains surrounding Jack Sparrow. He does not require a sword, monstrous appearance, or magical power to be threatening. Hollander plays him with calm precision and controlled arrogance. His authority comes from institutions, commerce, law, and the power of the East India Trading Company. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest arrived in 2006 at a moment when Hollywood was increasingly dominated by large-scale franchises, fantasy adventures, and effects-driven spectacles. Yet its cultural impact went beyond simply becoming another successful sequel. The film helped confirm that pirate stories, once considered commercially uncertain, could again occupy the center of popular entertainment. Its enormous success strengthened the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise as one of the defining cinematic properties of the 2000s and turned its characters, imagery, music, and humor into recognizable elements of global popular culture. Before The Curse of the Black Pearl appeared in 2003, the pirate genre had experienced a long period of inconsistent commercial success. Expensive failures had made studios cautious about traditional pirate adventures. The first Pirates film challenged that assumption, but Dead Man's Chest provided even stronger evidence that audiences had developed a major appetite for this world. Its box office performance was extraordinary, exceeding $1 billion worldwide and becoming the highest-grossing film released in 2006. At the time, reaching $1 billion remained an exceptional achievement rather than the increasingly familiar blockbuster milestone it would later become. The success of the sequel helped restore pirate imagery to mainstream culture. Tricorn hats, weathered ships, treasure maps, supernatural sailors, sea monsters, and exaggerated pirate speech became increasingly visible in entertainment and merchandise. Pirates had never disappeared from popular imagination, but the franchise gave the archetype a modern identity. Instead of presenting pirates exclusively as historical criminals or traditional adventure heroes, the films portrayed them as chaotic outsiders living beyond ordinary social rules. Captain Jack Sparrow became the central symbol of this revival. By Dead Man's Chest, Johnny Depp's character had evolved into a cultural icon. Jack's walk, voice, hand movements, clothing, dreadlocks, compass, and constantly shifting loyalties were widely imitated. Costume parties and Halloween celebrations became filled with versions of Jack Sparrow, while impersonators incorporated his mannerisms into performances around the world. The character became so recognizable that even people who had not closely followed the films could identify his appearance and behavior. Jack also contributed to a broader change in the image of the blockbuster hero. He was not physically imposing, consistently courageous, or morally dependable. He frequently ran away, lied to his allies, manipulated enemies, and survived through luck as much as skill. Yet audiences embraced him. This helped reinforce the popularity of the flawed, comedic anti-hero within mainstream adventure cinema. Jack Sparrow demonstrated that a major franchise could revolve around a protagonist whose greatest strength was unpredictability. Dead Man's Chest also introduced imagery that became deeply embedded in popular culture. Davy Jones was especially influential. His tentacled face and sea creature crew created a visual identity immediately associated with the franchise. The combination of nautical mythology and advanced digital effects made the Flying Dutchman crew feel simultaneously ancient and technologically groundbreaking. Davy Jones became one of the most recognizable fantasy villains of the decade. The Kraken had a similarly powerful effect. The enormous creature attacking ships from beneath the ocean became one of the movie's signature images. References to releasing or summoning the Kraken spread far beyond the film itself, appearing in jokes, internet discussions, games, television, advertising, and other entertainment. The phrase "release the Kraken" existed independently of Dead Man's Chest and was strongly associated with earlier popular culture, but the renewed visibility of giant sea monsters during this period helped connect the idea with a new generation. The film's music became another major part of its cultural identity. The musical language established across the pirate series became instantly associated with cinematic adventure. Themes connected with sword fights, ships, and heroic entrances were frequently imitated in online videos, sporting events, trailers, amateur productions, and internet culture. The music became shorthand for exaggerated adventure, allowing audiences to recognize the pirate's atmosphere within seconds. Dead Man's Chest also arrived during the rapid expansion of online fan culture. In 2006, social media had not yet developed into its modern form, but forums, fan websites, video platforms, blogs, and early online communities were transforming how audiences discussed films. The romantic tension involving Jack, Elizabeth, and Will generated extensive debate. Fans analyzed Elizabeth's attraction to Jack, questioned Jack's true feelings, and argued over which relationships should ultimately survive. This participation helped turn blockbuster viewing into an ongoing cultural conversation. Audiences did not simply watch the movie and leave it behind. They created fan art, edited videos, wrote fictional stories, discussed theories, quoted dialogue, and examined clues about the next installment. The cliffhanger ending intensified this behavior. Jack had apparently been killed by the Kraken, the Black Pearl had been destroyed, and Barbossa suddenly returned from the dead. With that world's end already anticipated, Dead Man's Chest functioned as part of a continuing cinematic event. The franchise also had an important relationship with theme park culture. Pirates of the Caribbean had originated as a Disney attraction rather than as a novel or conventional film property. The success of the movies reversed the normal direction of adaptation. Elements associated with the films and Jack Sparrow were eventually incorporated into versions of the attraction, demonstrating how cinema could reshape the source that originally inspired it. The character created for the movie became almost inseparable from the broader Pirates brand. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest was one of the most ambitious productions of its era. After the unexpected success of The Curse of the Black Pearl, Disney faced a difficult challenge. The sequel needed to preserve the humor, characters, sword fighting, and supernatural adventure audiences loved while making the world substantially larger. Director Gore Verbinski returned with producer Jerry Bruckheimer, screenwriters Ted Elliott and Terry Ruscio, and much of the original cast and crew. Their solution was not simply to repeat the first movie, but to create a darker, stranger, and more technically demanding adventure. Dead Man's Chest and its follow-up, At World's End, were developed as interconnected stories. Large portions of the productions were planned around an enormous continuous filmmaking operation. This created logistical advantages, since sets, ships, locations, costumes, and actors could serve both movies, but it also produced immense pressure. The filmmakers were constructing the second film while preparing material needed for the third, meaning that creative and practical decisions had consequences extending beyond a single production. Filming took place across several locations, particularly in the Caribbean. Dominica became one of the production's most important environments. Its dense vegetation, mountains, rivers, and dramatic coastline gave the movie a wild appearance that would have been difficult to reproduce entirely on studio sets. The island was used extensively for sequences involving Jack Sparrow and the Pelagostos, as well as other tropical scenes. The natural environment provided enormous visual value, but transporting a major Hollywood production into such terrain created challenges involving equipment, weather, transportation, communication, and large numbers of crew members. The filmmakers wanted the locations to feel physical rather than relying entirely on computer-generated backgrounds. This philosophy can be seen throughout the movie. Beaches, forests, ships, practical sets, water tanks, and constructed environments were combined with digital effects. As a result, even the most fantastical sequences usually contain something tangible for the actors to interact with. This became especially important when supernatural characters and creatures were added later. One of the production's most complicated achievements was the Flying Dutchman. The ship needed to appear ancient, supernatural, and almost alive, as though the ocean itself had gradually consumed it. Its crew followed the same concept. Rather than looking like ordinary sailors wearing monster makeup, they appeared to be transforming into parts of the sea. Shells, coral, fish, and other marine forms merged with human bodies. The designs created a disturbing visual suggestion that anyone serving Davy Jones long enough would eventually lose his human identity. Davy Jones presented an even greater technical challenge. Bill Nighy performed the character on set rather than simply providing a voice after filming. He wore special performance capture equipment while acting opposite Johnny Depp, Orlando Bloom, and the other performers. This allowed the cast to react to an actual actor instead of imagining a completely absent digital creature. Nighy's movements, expressions, posture, and timing formed the foundation of the finished performance. Industrial light and magic then transformed that performance into the Davy Jones seen in the movie. His face contained numerous moving tentacles, while his skin had the wet texture of a sea creature. The achievement was especially impressive because the effects did not eliminate Nighy's acting. His eyes, expressions, and emotional reactions remained readable beneath the digital transformation. The visual effects team treated the technology as a way to enhance the performance rather than replace it. The Kraken created a different problem. Unlike Davy Jones, it could not be represented by a human performer standing directly in front of the actors. The filmmakers therefore had to coordinate practical destruction, stunt work, water effects, mechanical elements, and computer-generated imagery. When the Kraken attacks a ship, actors react to tentacles and impacts that would often be completed digitally later. Sections of the environment could be physically damaged or moved to give performers genuine forces to respond to. Another memorable production challenge involved the giant wheel sequence. Will Turner, Norrington, and Jack Sparrow become involved in an elaborate fight surrounding a large wooden water wheel that eventually breaks free and rolls through the landscape. The sequence represents Verbinski's preference for combining action with physical comedy. Instead of staging a conventional sword fight on stable ground, the environment constantly changes the rules. Characters climb, fall, run, balance, and continue fighting while the wheel moves. The Pelagosto escape was similarly designed as controlled chaos. Jack is tied to a long pole while members of his crew attempt to escape from cages suspended above the jungle. The sequence depends heavily on stunt coordination, physical performance, editing, and comic timing. Depp's willingness to use his entire body as part of Jack Sparrow's humor was particularly valuable. Jack's movements could communicate panic, arrogance, calculation, and absurdity without requiring dialogue. Verbinski encouraged a tone in which danger and comedy could exist simultaneously. A character might face death in one moment and become part of a visual joke in the next. This balancing act was essential to the pirate's identity. If the supernatural material became too frightening, the film could lose its adventurous spirit. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest begins by immediately disrupting the happy ending of The Curse of the Black Pearl. Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann are preparing to marry, but their wedding is interrupted by the arrival of Lord Cutler Beckett and forces from the East India Trading Company. Both are arrested for helping Captain Jack Sparrow escape. This opening establishes one of the sequel's central structural ideas. Actions from the first film now have consequences. The characters cannot simply return to normal life after their previous adventure. Beckett offers Will a way to save Elizabeth. He wants Jack Sparrow's magical compass, which points toward whatever its holder desires most. Will must locate Jack and obtain it. This mission provides the narrative with its first major objective, but the film quickly reveals that Jack has problems of his own. He once made a bargain with Davy Jones, captain of the supernatural Flying Dutchman. Jones raised the Black Pearl from the depths and allowed Jack to captain it for 13 years. Now the debt must be paid, and Jack is expected to serve aboard the Dutchman for 100 years. Jack receives a terrifying warning from bootstrap Bill Turner, who has become part of Jones's cursed crew. Jack is given the black spot, marking him as prey for the Kraken. From this moment, Jack's motivation becomes survival. He wants to escape his agreement with Jones, and nearly every decision he makes is connected to avoiding the fate approaching him from the sea. The film initially divides its main characters. Will searches for Jack, Elizabeth attempts to regain her freedom, and Jack pursues his own solution. This gives Dead Man's Chest a more complicated structure than the first movie. Instead of one central rescue mission, several characters follow separate goals that gradually intersect. Their objectives frequently conflict, creating a story in which alliances constantly change. Will eventually finds Jack on an island inhabited by the Pelagostos, where Jack has been mistaken for a god who must be released from his human form. The sequence functions as an extended action comedy, temporarily delaying the main supernatural plot while reuniting Will with the Black Pearl crew. After an elaborate escape, Jack visits Tia Dalma, a mysterious woman with knowledge of Davy Jones and the supernatural world. Tia Dalma explains the importance of the Dead Man's Chest. Inside it is the still-beating heart of Davy Jones. Jones removed his own heart after experiencing emotional suffering and locked it away. Whoever controls the heart can potentially control Jones. Suddenly, the film's many storylines acquire a common object. Jack wants the heart to escape his death. Will eventually needs it to free his father. Beckett wants it because controlling Davy Jones would give the East India Trading Company extraordinary power over the seas. Jack attempts to negotiate with Jones, but the encounter reveals his selfish instincts. Jones demands 100 souls in exchange for Jack's freedom, and Jack begins searching for people he can trade. Will becomes trapped aboard the Flying Dutchman, where he discovers that Bootstrap Bill is his father. This is one of the movie's most important emotional turning points. Will's mission changes from simply helping Elizabeth to rescuing his father from eternal servitude. The Flying Dutchman section slows the pace enough to develop the mythology surrounding Jones. Sailors gamble years of service through a dice game called Liar's Dice, while Bootstrap's condition demonstrates the consequences of remaining aboard the ship. Will learns more about the key to the chest and eventually escapes with it. The narrative has now established all the necessary pieces: the key, the chest, the heart, and several competing characters who want them for different reasons. Meanwhile, Elizabeth escapes confinement and enters the pirate world herself. Her journey brings her back to Jack, but their relationship has changed. Jack recognizes that Elizabeth is attracted to the freedom he represents, while Elizabeth sees qualities in Jack that complicate her loyalty to Will. The romantic tension is deliberately left unresolved, adding an emotional conflict to the physical search for the chest. The story converges on Isla Cruces, where the chest is buried. This section demonstrates the film's preference for overlapping objectives. Jack wants the heart to bargain for his freedom. Will wants it to force Jones to release Bootstrap. James Norrington, now disgraced and desperate, wants to deliver the heart to Beckett and restore his former life. Because all three men possess understandable motives, the conflict cannot be solved through a simple division between hero and villain. Their disagreement becomes an elaborate three-way sword fight. The battle moves from the beach into an abandoned structure and eventually onto a giant rolling water wheel. While the men fight, Pintel and Rigetti attempt to steal the chest. Elizabeth becomes increasingly frustrated by everyone's selfishness, and Jones's crew arrives to recover the heart. The sequence turns multiple narrative conflicts into physical comedy and action at the same time. The crucial plot twist occurs when Norrington secretly takes the heart. Jack believes he has secured his chance to control Jones, but the container he carries is empty. Norrington later delivers the heart to Beckett, transforming a disgraced secondary character into the person responsible for giving the East India Trading Company its greatest weapon. This also prepares the political conflict that will dominate the next film. The final act shifts from the treasure hunt to survival. The Kraken attacks the Black Pearl, and the crew attempts to fight a creature far beyond ordinary human strength. Jack initially abandons the others, rowing away while they remain in danger. This seems to confirm his selfish nature. Yet he looks back at the Pearl and makes one of his most important decisions in the film. He returns. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest may present itself as a supernatural adventure filled with sword fights, monsters, treasure, and comedy. But beneath that spectacle is a story concerned with freedom, debt, desire, identity, love, mortality, and the consequences of personal choices. Almost every major character is trapped by some form of obligation. The movie repeatedly asks what freedom is worth and what people are willing to sacrifice in order to obtain it. Debt is perhaps the film's most important theme. Jack Sparrow owes Davy Jones 100 years of service aboard the Flying Dutchman because of an agreement made years earlier. Bootstrap Bill is already trapped by his own bargain. Will and Elizabeth are punished for helping Jack escape, while Norrington lives with the consequences of losing his position and reputation. Even Davy Jones is emotionally imprisoned by decisions connected to his past. The supernatural debts of the story therefore reflect ordinary human obligations. Promises, mistakes, relationships, and ambitions can all become chains. The dead man's chest itself is the clearest symbol of this idea. The chest contains the still-beating heart of Davy Jones. On the surface, it is a magical object that drives the plot, but symbolically it represents emotional self-protection. Jones has physically removed his heart because he could not tolerate the suffering associated with love. Instead of overcoming pain, he separates himself from the part of his identity capable of feeling it. His solution makes him powerful, but it also transforms him into something increasingly inhuman. The heart therefore symbolizes both vulnerability and control. Jones believes that hiding it protects him, yet whoever possesses the heart gains power over him. The very thing he removes to avoid weakness becomes his greatest weakness. This creates one of the film's central contradictions. Attempting to eliminate vulnerability can create a different form of imprisonment. Jack Sparrow has his own symbolic object in the compass. Unlike an ordinary compass, it does not point north. It points toward whatever its holder wants most. This makes it a physical representation of desire. Yet the compass becomes unreliable when Jack cannot clearly understand what he wants. His problem is not that the magic has failed. His problem is uncertainty within himself. Elizabeth experiences something similar when she holds the compass. Her attraction to freedom, adventure, will, and perhaps Jack creates uncertainty about her desires. The compass turns internal conflict into something visible. Characters cannot simply claim to know what they want. The object can expose desires they may prefer not to acknowledge. Freedom is especially important to Jack. He presents himself as a man without permanent obligations. The Black Pearl allows him to move across the sea, while piracy allows him to reject conventional authority. Yet Dead Man's Chest reveals that his freedom is partly an illusion. His past agreement with Jones has finally caught up with him. The man who appears to belong to nobody is suddenly reminded that someone possesses a claim over his future. The Black Pearl consequently becomes more than a ship. It represents Jack's identity and independence. He once accepted a terrible bargain to become its captain, demonstrating how much the Pearl means to him. When the ship is ultimately destroyed by the Kraken, Jack loses the physical symbol of the freedom he has spent the entire film trying to preserve. The Kraken itself symbolizes unavoidable consequence. Jack spends much of the story running from responsibility, bargaining with other people, and searching for loopholes. The Kraken cannot be persuaded. It simply follows the mark placed upon him. Whenever it appears, the creature turns an abstract debt into immediate physical destruction. It is the consequence that keeps approaching no matter how cleverly Jack attempts to escape. This makes Jack's final confrontation with the Kraken significant. Earlier, he escapes the Black Pearl while his crew remains behind. For a moment, he seems to have succeeded in placing survival above loyalty. Yet he returns. When the Kraken finally rises before him, Jack draws his sword rather than running. Symbolically, the character who has spent the movie avoiding his fate finally turns to face it. Will Turner represents another form of duty. At first, his central motivation is Elizabeth. He wants to rescue her and restore the future they were supposed to have together. Discovering Bootstrap Bill changes his emotional direction. Will realizes that his father is not simply part of his past, but a living prisoner aboard the Flying Dutchman. His responsibility now extends across generations. Bootstrap's physical transformation provides a disturbing symbol of lost identity. Members of Jonesy's crew gradually merge with the sea and the ship. Their humanity disappears as their years of service accumulate. The curse therefore gives visible form to what prolonged servitude can do to a person. They surrender time, individuality, and eventually even recognizable human features. The Flying Dutchman itself functions as a prison disguised as a ship. The scene normally represents movement and freedom in pirate stories, but aboard the Dutchman it becomes endless captivity. Its sailors can travel across oceans while remaining completely trapped. This reversal strengthens the movie's argument that physical movement is not the same as genuine freedom. Elizabeth's story explores freedom from another direction. She begins the film trapped by law, social expectation, and political authority. Her wedding is destroyed by Beckett's intervention, and she is imprisoned because of choices she made in the previous film. Yet she gradually becomes more comfortable acting outside the rules of her former society. She disguises herself, manipulates others, carries weapons, negotiates with pirates, and makes increasingly difficult decisions. Her relationship with Jack symbolizes the attraction of unrestricted freedom. Will represents loyalty, love, and stability, while Jack represents unpredictability and escape from conventional expectations. The film does not reduce Elizabeth's conflict to a simple romantic choice. Instead, her attraction to Jack also reflects her attraction to the world he represents. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest expands the visual identity of the first film into something darker, stranger, and considerably more ambitious. Director Gore Verbinski and cinematographer Dariusz Wolski preserve the romantic imagery audiences associate with pirate adventures, including tropical islands, enormous sailing ships, moonlit oceans, beaches, and colonial ports, but surround those images with decay, storms, mud, supernatural creatures, and threatening shadows. The result is a movie that can look beautiful and inviting in one sequence and almost like a horror film in the next. One of the strongest visual characteristics is the contrast between civilization and the pirate world. Port Royal is associated with organized architecture, uniforms, formal clothing, and controlled spaces. The arrival of Lord Cutler Beckett is accompanied by rain and a cold atmosphere that immediately destroys the warmth expected from Will and Elizabeth's wedding. The visual message is clear before the political conflict is fully explained. Authority has entered their lives, and the future they imagined has been interrupted. Once the story leaves Port Royal, the environments become increasingly uncontrolled. Tropical vegetation fills the frame, beaches stretch into the distance, ships dominate the horizon, and characters are frequently surrounded by water, mud, smoke, ropes, wood, and weathered objects. The pirate world rarely appears clean. Surfaces are scratched, clothing is worn, ships are damaged, and settlements appear constructed from whatever materials were available. This texture helps the fantasy feel physically believable. The Black Pearl remains one of the film's most important visual symbols. Its dark sails and almost ghostly silhouette immediately distinguish it from ordinary vessels. The ship is often photographed as an extension of Jack Sparrow himself, mysterious, damaged, difficult to control, yet strangely elegant. Wide shots emphasize the Pearl against enormous ocean landscapes, reminding viewers that even a legendary ship is small compared with the forces surrounding it. The Flying Dutchman is designed according to a completely different visual philosophy. Instead of simply appearing old, it looks as though it has become part of the ocean. Wood, shells, marine growth, moisture, and organic textures merge together until the boundary between vessel and living organism becomes uncertain. Dark greens, browns, grays, and wet surfaces dominate its appearance. The ship seems diseased and alive at the same time. Davy Jones continues this visual concept. His design could easily have become excessive, but the effects focus attention on recognizable emotional features, especially his eyes. His face is covered by moving tentacles, his skin resembles that of a sea creature, and his body combines human and marine anatomy. Yet the camera frequently moves close enough for the audience to read his expressions. The visual effects therefore support Bill Nighy's performance instead of hiding it. The crew of the Flying Dutchman expands this idea of physical transformation. Each sailor appears to occupy a different stage between humanity and the sea. Shells, coral, fish, and other marine forms become part of their bodies. Their designs make the supernatural curse visible without requiring constant explanation. Simply looking at them tells the audience what centuries of service under Jones can eventually do. The Kraken is handled differently because its scale is part of its power. Verbinski often avoids revealing the entire creature immediately. Tentacles emerge from the water, wrap around ships, destroy wood, and pull sailors into the sea. By showing fragments before providing a larger view, the film creates suspense and allows the audience to imagine the size of what remains beneath the surface. When the Kraken attacks, the cinematography emphasizes physical impact. Decks tilt, ropes snap, wood explodes, sailors fall, and enormous tentacles cross the frame. The camera frequently places human figures beside the creature's limbs, providing an immediate sense of scale. The effects are convincing partly because digital imagery is integrated with practical sets, real water, debris, stunt work, and physical destruction. Lighting changes significantly according to location. Tropical scenes can use bright sunlight and saturated natural environments, creating the visual pleasure expected from an exotic adventure. The Flying Dutchman is frequently darker and more oppressive. Tia Dalma's home uses candles, smoke, shadows, and warm points of light surrounded by darkness. The environment feels mysterious because the audience is never allowed to see everything clearly. Color also helps separate the different worlds. Port Royal contains the controlled colors of British uniforms and colonial society. Tropical islands introduce vivid greens, earth tones, and bright skies. The Dutchman shifts towards sickly marine colors, while nighttime ocean scenes depend on deep blues, grays, and blacks. These changes allow the film to move between comedy, romance, horror, and adventure without losing visual coherence. Camera movement becomes particularly energetic during action scenes. Dead Man's Chest frequently constructs action around movement within the environment rather than simply cutting between sword strikes. The three-way duel between Jack, Will, and Norrington is the clearest example. The fight begins as a conflict over the key and gradually expands across the island until a giant water wheel becomes part of the choreography. The wheel sequence transforms the frame itself into a moving battlefield. Characters fight on top of it, inside it, beside it, and around it while the landscape passes behind them. The circular motion creates visual comedy while constantly changing which fighter has the advantage. It resembles a piece of physical silent film comedy placed inside a modern effects-driven blockbuster. The Pelagosto escape follows a similar philosophy. Jack is tied to a pole, members of his crew swing in suspended cages, and characters tumble through jungle environments. Wide shots are important because much of the humor depends on seeing bodies moving through space. Close-ups capture Jack's reactions, but the larger compositions allow the audience to understand the absurd physical situation. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest uses music and sound as essential parts of its adventure, comedy, supernatural atmosphere, and emotional storytelling. The film constantly moves between enormous action sequences and quieter moments of tension, and its audio design helps connect these different tones. The sound of waves, wood, storms, weapons, creatures, and ships creates a physical world, while the musical score gives that world its sense of scale and mythology. Hans Zimmer composed the score for Dead Man's Chest after contributing additional music to The Curse of the Black Pearl, whose credited composer was Klaus Badelt. For the sequel, Zimmer was able to develop the musical identity of the Pirates universe on a much larger scale. Familiar musical ideas remain present, preserving continuity with the first adventure, but Dead Man's Chest introduces darker themes designed specifically around Davy Jones, the Kraken, and the supernatural direction of the story. The score continues to use the powerful rhythmic style associated with the franchise. Fast string patterns, forceful percussion, brass, and repeated musical phrases create constant forward movement. This approach is particularly effective during sword fights, escapes, and ship sequences because the music rarely feels passive. It seems to push the characters toward the next collision, joke, or dangerous situation. At the same time, Zimmer understood that simply repeating the heroic sound of the first movie would not be enough. Dead Man's Chest is more threatening and tragic. Jack Sparrow is being hunted. Will discovers his father's terrible fate. Elizabeth becomes morally conflicted, and Davy Jones introduces a darker mythology. The score therefore contains heavier textures and more unsettling musical ideas. Davy Jones receives the film's most distinctive new musical identity. His theme is closely associated with the sound of a music box and a large pipe organ. The music box quality suggests something private, fragile, and connected to memory. It hints that beneath Jonesy's monstrous appearance is a deeply wounded emotional history. The organ transforms that sadness into something enormous and threatening. The organ is especially appropriate for Jones because it feels ancient, mechanical, religious, and supernatural at the same time. When Jones plays aboard the Flying Dutchman, the instrument becomes almost an extension of his emotional state. He is not simply accompanied by a villain theme from outside the story. He physically performs music within his own world, turning his pain into sound. This combination of sadness and menace makes Jones musically more complicated than a conventional antagonist. His theme does not merely announce danger. It suggests that something terrible happened to him before the events of the film. The audience does not yet know the complete history of his lost love, but the music communicates emotional damage before the story fully explains it. The Kraken is represented with a different musical personality. Its sequences require scale and relentless momentum. The score uses heavy rhythms and increasingly intense layers to suggest that the creature is an unstoppable force rather than an ordinary opponent. When the Kraken approaches, the music works together with the sound effects to create the impression that the ocean itself has become hostile. Sound design is crucial to making the Kraken convincing. The creature is enormous, so its presence must be communicated not only visually but physically through audio. Water crashes against ships, timber bends and breaks, ropes strain, sailors shout, and tentacles strike the deck with tremendous force. These sounds provide weight. Without them, even impressive visual effects could feel detached from the physical environment. The destruction of ships is particularly effective because individual sounds remain recognizable within the chaos. Cracking wood, snapping ropes, collapsing structures, cannon fire, and rushing water create layers of danger. The audience hears the vessel failing around the characters. A ship is not simply shown breaking apart. It sounds as though every section is being placed under impossible pressure. The Flying Dutchman has its own audio atmosphere. Its creaking structure, wet surfaces, supernatural crew, and violent movement create an environment that feels different from the Black Pearl. The Dutchman seems less like an ordinary ship and more like a living prison. Its sounds support the production design by suggesting age, decay, and something organic beneath the wood. Even quieter sounds carry narrative importance. Davy Jones's heart continues beating after being removed from his body. The heartbeat transforms the chest from an ordinary treasure container into something disturbing. A beating heart normally signals life and intimacy, but here it exists separately from its owner. Hearing it reminds the audience that Jones has attempted to physically separate himself from human vulnerability. The dice game aboard the Flying Dutchman provides another example of controlled sound. Compared with the large action sequences, the scene depends on smaller noises, voices, pauses, and the tension of the game itself. The reduced scale allows the audience to concentrate on Will, Bootstrap Bill, and Jones. Every decision feels dangerous because years of service are being gambled. Jack Sparrow's scenes often use sound for comedy. His movements can be accompanied by sudden changes in musical rhythm, physical impacts, environmental noises, or brief pauses that allow Depp's expressions to become the joke. The movie understands that comedy is partly about timing, and audio frequently determines exactly when a visual gag becomes funny. The Pelagosto sequence demonstrates this clearly. The action is dangerous, but the music and sound effects encourage the audience to experience it as elaborate physical comedy. Bodies swing, cages move, characters fall, and Jack remains trapped on a pole. The soundtrack supports the rhythm of the sequence almost as though the action were choreographed to music. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest arrived in theaters in 2006 carrying expectations that were dramatically different from those surrounding the first film. The Curse of the Black Pearl had initially seemed like a risky project based on a theme park attraction, but it became a major international success and turned Captain Jack Sparrow into a cultural phenomenon. By the time the sequel appeared, audiences were no longer wondering whether a pirate movie could succeed. They wanted to know whether the filmmakers could reproduce the magic of the original while making the adventure even larger. Commercially, the answer was overwhelming. Dead Man's Chest became one of the biggest theatrical events of 2006. In North America, it opened to approximately $135 million during its first weekend, setting an opening weekend record at the time. Audiences arrived in enormous numbers, demonstrating how much the popularity of the first film had grown during the 3 years between installments. Its worldwide performance was even more significant. Dead Man's Chest eventually earned more than $1 billion globally, becoming the highest-grossing movie of 2006. At that point in cinema history, membership in the billion-dollar club was extremely rare. The film became only the third movie ever to cross that threshold, following Titanic and The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Its success confirmed Pirates of the Caribbean as one of Disney's most valuable modern film franchises. Audience enthusiasm was generally stronger than the critical response. Moviegoers responded enthusiastically to Johnny Depp, the action sequences, the supernatural creatures, the humor, and the scale of the production. Captain Jack Sparrow remained the primary attraction. Depp had already received enormous praise for creating the character in the first movie, and audiences were eager to see how Jack would react when confronted with an enemy he genuinely feared. Critics were considerably more divided. Many admired the movie's technical accomplishments and entertainment value, but questioned its complicated narrative. One frequent criticism concerned the number of characters, motivations, magical objects, betrayals, bargains, and separate storylines. Jack wants to escape his debt to Davy Jones. Will wants to save Elizabeth and later his father. Elizabeth wants freedom and Will. Norrington wants to restore his former status. Beckett wants Jack's compass and ultimately control over the seas. Jones wants Jack to honor their agreement. All of these objectives eventually intersect around the chest and the heart. For viewers willing to follow these competing motivations, the complexity gave the adventure energy and unpredictability. For others, the film felt overstuffed compared with the cleaner structure of The Curse of the Black Pearl. Critics sometimes argue that the sequel demonstrated the familiar blockbuster tendency to assume that bigger automatically meant better. The running time also attracted criticism. At approximately 2.5 hours, Dead Man's Chest was substantially longer than many conventional summer action films. The Pelagosto Island sequence, extended sword fights, mythology surrounding Davy Jones, romantic complications, and multiple searches for the chest created a deliberately expansive adventure. Some reviews enjoyed the abundance of spectacle, while others felt individual sequences continued after their narrative purpose had already been achieved. The movie's ending became another major point of discussion. Rather than resolving the story, Dead Man's Chest concludes with several enormous questions unanswered. Jack is apparently killed by the Kraken. The Black Pearl is destroyed. Davy Jones remains alive. Beckett obtains Jonesy's heart through Norrington. Will sees Elizabeth kiss Jack without understanding why. Then Barbossa unexpectedly returns from the dead. For some critics, this made the film feel incomplete. It was clearly functioning as the middle chapter of a larger narrative, with At World's End intended to provide the conclusion. Audiences familiar with serialized storytelling often found the cliffhanger exciting, but some reviews believed a movie should provide greater independent resolution even when it belongs to a franchise. Despite criticism of the plot, the technical achievements received widespread admiration. Davy Jones became the clearest example. Bill Nighy's performance was transformed through sophisticated computer-generated effects, but his personality remained visible beneath the digital character. His eyes, expressions, posture, and vocal performance gave Jones emotional presence. The visual effects industry recognized the achievement. Dead Man's Chest won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. The victory reflected not only the complexity of Davy Jones but also the broader effects work involving the Flying Dutchman crew, the Kraken, supernatural environments, and large-scale destruction. The movie became an important reference point for digital characters because it demonstrated that an extensively computer-generated face could still preserve an actor's performance. The film received additional Academy Award nominations for Best Art Direction, Best Sound Editing, and Best Sound Mixing. These nominations reflected the extraordinary amount of craft involved in constructing the Pirates universe. Ships, islands, costumes, supernatural sailors, storms, weapons, and creatures all needed to belong convincingly to the same world. Johnny Depp also received major recognition for his performance. He was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor, an unusual achievement for a performance in a fantasy adventure sequel. Jack Sparrow depended heavily on comedy, physical movement, eccentric speech, and exaggerated behavior. Yet Depp's performance was treated as more than conventional blockbuster entertainment. Depp's nomination also demonstrated how strongly Jack Sparrow had entered mainstream culture. What had initially seemed like a strange interpretation of a pirate captain had become one of the most recognizable performances of the decade. Critics who were less enthusiastic about the sequel itself could still acknowledge Depp's unusual ability to dominate scenes without playing Jack as a conventional heroic lead. Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest left a legacy that extends far beyond its enormous box office performance in 2006. Although The Curse of the Black Pearl established the characters and proved that a modern pirate adventure could succeed, the second film demonstrated that Pirates of the Caribbean could operate on the scale of the largest fantasy franchises in cinema. Its success transformed the series from a surprising hit into a global entertainment property and influenced expectations surrounding visual effects, franchise storytelling, fantasy villains, merchandising, and modern adventure films. One of its clearest achievements was confirming the commercial revival of the pirate genre. Before the Pirates series, major studios had reasons to consider expensive pirate films dangerous investments. Dead Man's Chest helped reverse that perception by becoming a billion-dollar worldwide success. It demonstrated that audiences would enthusiastically embrace sailing ships, treasure mythology, sword fighting, sea monsters, and pirate characters when those traditional elements were combined with modern humor, fantasy, visual effects, and recognizable personalities. The film also strengthened the importance of Captain Jack Sparrow as the franchise's central icon. Johnny Depp's character had already become enormously popular after the first movie, but Dead Man's Chest proved that audiences wanted to follow Jack through a continuing series. His unusual combination of cowardice, bravery, selfishness, intelligence, luck, and physical comedy separated him from conventional blockbuster heroes. Jack's popularity contributed to a broader appetite for protagonists who could be morally unreliable while remaining entertaining. He could betray companions in one scene and risk his life for them later. The audience could never be completely certain whether he had a brilliant plan or was improvising after everything had gone wrong. This unpredictability became one of the most imitated qualities associated with the franchise's style of adventure comedy. The movie's visual effects created an equally important legacy. Davy Jones became a landmark example of digital character creation. Bill Nighy's performance remained the emotional foundation, while computer-generated imagery transformed his face and body into an elaborate marine creature. The finished character demonstrated that digital effects could radically alter an actor while preserving subtle expressions and personality. This mattered because digital characters were becoming increasingly important to blockbuster filmmaking. The challenge was no longer simply creating creatures that looked impressive from a distance. Filmmakers wanted computer-generated characters capable of carrying dialogue scenes, expressing emotion, interacting naturally with human actors, and surviving close-up photography. Davy Jones represented a major step in that direction. The Academy Award for Best Visual Effects reinforced the significance of this achievement. The movie's effects were not limited to Jones. His crew required numerous combinations of human anatomy and marine life, while the Kraken demanded large-scale integration of digital animation, water, practical destruction, actors, ships, and environmental effects. These sequences helped establish a standard for fantasy spectacle in which computer-generated imagery was most convincing when supported by strong physical environments and performances. Davy Jones also influenced the way audiences remembered fantasy villains. His visual design was immediately distinctive, but his emotional history prevented him from functioning only as a monster. His removed heart, lost love, and bitterness gave him tragedy beneath his cruelty. Later fantasy blockbusters increasingly emphasized antagonists with emotional wounds and understandable motivations rather than villains defined entirely by evil. The film's approach to franchise storytelling also anticipated a direction that became increasingly common in Hollywood. Dead Man's Chest does not behave like a completely independent sequel. It deliberately ends with major conflicts unresolved and leads directly into At World's End. Jack is trapped in Davy Jones's locker. Beckett possesses the heart, while remains determined to save Bootstrap, and Barbossa unexpectedly returns. This structure encouraged audiences to view individual installments as chapters within a larger narrative. Modern franchise filmmaking frequently uses this approach, with cliffhanger, interconnected character arcs, recurring villains, and unresolved plot lines designed to continue across several movies. Dead Man's Chest was not the first sequel to operate this way, but its enormous commercial success demonstrated how effectively serialized storytelling could function within a global blockbuster property. Its legacy is inseparable from At World's End. The two films form a closely connected narrative, and many elements introduced or expanded in Dead Man's Chest become essential to the third movie. Beckett's acquisition of Davy Jones's heart changes the political balance of the seas. Elizabeth's decision to sacrifice Jack damages her relationship with Will. Bootstrap Bill's imprisonment motivates Will. Tia Dalma's mysteries become more important, and Barbossa's return establishes the mission to recover Jack. The wider franchise continued after the original trilogy. On Stranger Tides followed in 2011, with Jack Sparrow moving into the central position without Will and Elizabeth as principal characters. Dead Men Tell No Tales later continue the mythology while reconnecting the series to earlier characters and family histories. Whatever the varying critical responses to later installments, their existence was made possible by the extraordinary commercial strength established during the original trilogy, particularly by Dead Man's Chest. The film also contributed enormously to Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean brand. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest created a particularly strong relationship with audiences because it arrived after viewers had already developed affection for the characters of The Curse of the Black Pearl. By 2006, Captain Jack Sparrow, Will Turner, Elizabeth Swann, and the Black Pearl were familiar figures. Audiences entered the sequel expecting another entertaining pirate adventure, but the film challenged those expectations by becoming darker, more complicated, and less emotionally secure than its predecessor. Instead of simply repeating the first movie, it placed familiar characters in situations that encouraged viewers to question their loyalties and motivations. For many younger viewers, Dead Man's Chest represented blockbuster cinema at its most exciting. It contained sword fights, tropical islands, supernatural sailors, enormous ships, comedy, romance, treasure hunting, and the Kraken. These elements allowed the movie to function as pure adventure even when audiences were not interested in analyzing its deeper themes. Children and teenagers could enjoy Jack's physical comedy or the giant water wheel fight, while older viewers could follow the romantic uncertainty, moral compromises, and political struggle beneath the spectacle. Jack Sparrow remained the character audiences responded to most immediately. Viewers had already learned that Jack could not be judged according to ordinary heroic standards. He lies, cheats, runs from danger, and attempts to manipulate almost everyone around him. Yet audiences continued to want him to succeed. Part of this attachment came from Johnny Depp's humor, but another part came from the feeling that Jack represented freedom from ordinary expectations. Different viewers could therefore interpret Jack in different ways. To some, he was simply a brilliant comic character. To others, he represented rebellion against authority. He did not belong to the Navy, the East India Trading Company, or even consistently to other pirates. He attempted to remain outside every system that wanted to control him. That quality made him especially appealing to younger audiences attracted to characters who rejected rules without becoming conventional villains. Dead Man's Chest complicates that fantasy by showing that complete freedom is impossible. Jack's old agreement with Davy Jones returns to control his future. Audiences watch a character famous for escaping impossible situations discover that some consequences cannot simply be talked away. This made Jack more vulnerable than he had appeared in the first film. The moment when Jack abandons the Black Pearl during the Kraken attack became an important test of how audiences understood him. His escape seems entirely consistent with his selfish personality. Yet when he looks back and returns, the film reveals that the audience's faith in him was not completely misplaced. Jack may resist being called a hero, but he is capable of choosing others over himself. His apparent death therefore had genuine emotional power. Jack does not die while running. He faces the Kraken with his sword drawn. For audiences who had spent 2 films watching him avoid direct confrontation whenever possible, the image represented a surprising form of courage. The scene allowed viewers to reinterpret his earlier behavior without pretending that he had suddenly become morally perfect. Elizabeth produced more complicated reactions. In the first film, she had already resisted the limitations of a social position, but Dead Man's Chest pushes her much further into the pirate world. She carries weapons, manipulates men, disguises herself, makes independent decisions, and becomes increasingly comfortable with deception. Some viewers saw this as an exciting development because she was no longer simply the woman Will needed to rescue. Her attraction to Jack created one of the most debated aspects of the movie. Audiences who strongly supported the relationship between Elizabeth and Will could view Jack as a threat. Other viewers found the chemistry between Elizabeth and Jack more unpredictable and exciting. The magical compass added another layer because it suggested that Elizabeth herself might not fully understand what she desired. The kiss between Jack and Elizabeth became the central emotional controversy. On first appearance, it seems to confirm their attraction. Seconds later, Elizabeth chains Jack to the Black Pearl and reveals that the kiss has also been a method of trapping him. Viewers are forced to interpret several emotions simultaneously. Elizabeth is attracted to Jack, furious with him, frightened of the Kraken, desperate to save the others, and horrified by what she decides to do. Will's perspective makes the moment even more painful. He sees the kiss without understanding the complete situation. The audience possesses more information than Will, but even viewers cannot reduce Elizabeth's action to a single motivation. This ambiguity gave fans something to debate long after leaving the theater. Will also gain greater emotional depth through Bootstrap Bill. Previously, much of his motivation had centered on Elizabeth and his complicated relationship with piracy. Dead Man's Chest gives him another responsibility. His father is alive but condemned to serve aboard the Flying Dutchman. Viewers who interpreted Will as the morally stable character could now see that his loyalty would eventually force him into increasingly dangerous choices. Davy Jones generated another type of audience response. Visually, he was frightening and strange, particularly for younger viewers. Yet the story gradually encourages sympathy for him. His heart is hidden because he once experienced unbearable emotional pain. Audiences could recognize the metaphor even within an exaggerated fantasy world. Jones has attempted to protect himself from heartbreak by refusing to feel. That interpretation made him more memorable than a villain motivated only by conquest. His cruelty remains undeniable, but viewers can understand the emotional origin of his bitterness. His appearance reflects what he has become internally. The man who tried to escape emotional pain has gradually transformed into something physically inhuman. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest develops its characters by forcing them into conflict between what they claim to value and what they actually choose when placed under pressure. Unlike a traditional adventure in which heroes and villains remain clearly separated, the film allows nearly every important character to become morally complicated. Jack Sparrow struggles between survival and loyalty, Will Turner between romantic love and family duty, Elizabeth Swann between responsibility and freedom, while Davy Jones represents the destructive consequences of allowing emotional pain to consume an identity. Captain Jack Sparrow begins the film with one overwhelming motivation: avoiding death. His debt to Davy Jones has finally become impossible to ignore. Jack normally treats danger as a game that can be escaped through deception, negotiation, or luck, but Jones represents something different. The Kraken can follow Jack wherever he sails, and his usual confidence becomes increasingly fragile. This fear exposes the selfishness that has always existed beneath Jack's charm. He attempts to manipulate Will, searches for souls he can exchange for his own freedom, and repeatedly treats other people as pieces in his survival strategy. Yet the film does not portray this behavior as evidence that Jack is completely without conscience. His character arc depends upon the tension between the selfish man he pretends to be and the better instincts he repeatedly attempts to suppress. Elizabeth directly identifies this contradiction. She believes Jack is capable of doing the right thing even when he insists otherwise. Jack, meanwhile, argues that Elizabeth possesses a pirate's instinct beneath her respectable identity. Their relationship therefore becomes a mirror. Each recognizes something in the other that the other character is reluctant to admit. The Kraken attack provides the decisive moment in Jack's development. He escapes from the Black Pearl in a small boat while his crew remains behind. This is exactly what the most selfish version of Jack would do. He has finally achieved the opportunity he spent the entire movie seeking. He can survive while others pay the price. Then he looks back. Jack returns to the Pearl and joins the fight. The decision does not erase his previous betrayals, but it proves that survival is not his only value. When he later faces the Kraken with his sword drawn, he completes a small but meaningful transformation. The man who has spent the story running from death finally confronts it directly. Will Turner's development is built around changing responsibilities. At the beginning, his priority is Elizabeth. Their wedding has been destroyed, she has been arrested, and Will accepts Beckett's mission because he wants to save her. His motivations initially resemble those of the first film. Protect Elizabeth, find Jack, and overcome whatever obstacle stands between him and the woman he loves. The discovery of Bootstrap Bill changes Will's journey. His father is not dead but trapped aboard the Flying Dutchman. Will now understands that Bootstrap is suffering because of decisions connected to piracy and Davy Jones. Saving Elizabeth remains important, but freeing his father becomes another powerful obligation. Will's relationship with Bootstrap also complicates his understanding of his own identity. He spent much of his earlier life ashamed or uncertain about his father's reputation as a pirate. Now he encounters the actual man and discovers someone broken by punishment but still capable of love and sacrifice. Will's idealism begins to collide with the morally complicated world his father inhabits. The Liar's Die sequence expresses this relationship particularly well. Will risks himself to obtain information, while Bootstrap attempts to protect him. Their strategies conflict, but their motivations come from the same source. Each is willing to endanger himself for the other. Their bond develops rapidly because both understand how little time they may have. Elizabeth undergoes perhaps the most dramatic transformation. She begins as a governor's daughter whose wedding has been interrupted by political authority, but the restrictions of Port Royal increasingly disappear from her identity. She escapes confinement, disguises herself, negotiates with dangerous men, carries weapons, and enters the pirate world on her own terms. Her development is not simply a movement from weakness to strength. Elizabeth was already courageous in the first movie. Dead Man's Chest instead makes her morally less innocent. She learns to manipulate people and discovers that survival may require decisions that cannot easily be classified as honorable. Her relationship with Jack is central to this change. Jack represents a form of freedom that fascinates her. He acts without asking permission from society, ignores conventional respectability, and follows his own desires. Elizabeth is attracted not only to the man, but also to what his existence represents. Jack sees the opposite transformation occurring within her. He repeatedly suggests that Elizabeth is becoming more like a pirate. The climax proves his argument in a disturbing way. Elizabeth realizes that the Kraken wants Jack. She kisses him, uses the moment to chain him to the mast, and leaves him behind so the others can escape. The decision saves several lives, but it also forces Elizabeth to confront what she has become capable of doing. She does not celebrate the choice. Her expression afterward reveals guilt and emotional shock. Character development in Dead Man's Chest therefore has a price. Greater independence also means accepting responsibility for morally difficult actions. While witnessing the kiss creates another fracture. He does not see Elizabeth chain Jack to the mast and cannot fully understand her motivation. His relationship with Elizabeth therefore enters a new stage defined by doubt. The idealized romance of the first movie is replaced by secrecy, jealousy, and competing responsibilities. James Norrington follows a very different arc. In the first film, he was a respected Commodore representing law, discipline, and social order. Dead Man's Chest introduces him after a catastrophic fall. He has lost his rank, reputation, appearance, and confidence. His bitterness makes him almost unrecognizable from the controlled officer audiences previously knew. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest uses costume, makeup, and set design to make its fantasy world feel physical, historical, and lived in. The film constantly moves between British colonial authority, chaotic pirate settlements, tropical wilderness, supernatural ships, and mysterious interiors. Each environment has its own visual identity, yet everything appears to belong to the same universe. Production design and costume are therefore not simply decorative elements. They communicate personality, social position, transformation, danger, and the changing identities of the characters. Captain Jack Sparrow remains the most immediately recognizable example of costume being used to define personality. Jack's clothing appears assembled over years rather than selected as a complete outfit. His weathered coat, loose shirt, boots, belts, sash, hat, beads, and numerous personal objects suggest a man who carries his history on his body. Nothing looks perfectly maintained. His clothing has been exposed to salt, sun, date, and constant travel. Jack's costume also separates him from traditional heroic pirate imagery. He does not look clean or formally powerful. His authority comes from personality rather than uniform. The layers of fabric and accessories move with Johnny Depp's unusual physical performance, making the costume part of Jack's gestures. His hat is particularly important because Jack treats it almost as a symbol of his identity and status. Elizabeth Swann's costumes reveal a very different transformation. At the beginning of the series, formal dresses visually connected her to colonial society and the expectations surrounding a governor's daughter. Dead Man's Chest gradually removes those restrictions. Her interrupted wedding establishes the life she was expected to enter, but imprisonment and escape push her away from that controlled identity. As Elizabeth moves deeper into the pirate world, her clothing becomes increasingly practical. She disguises herself and adopts garments that permit physical movement rather than emphasizing social presentation. This change supports her character development. Elizabeth is no longer merely entering pirate spaces as an outsider. She is learning to function inside them. Will Turner occupies a position between these worlds. His clothing remains practical and comparatively restrained, reflecting his identity as a craftsman and swordsman rather than a theatrical pirate. Will lacks Jack's collection of eccentric accessories because his personality is more direct. His costume allows him to move naturally through action scenes while visually maintaining his role as the more conventional romantic hero. Lord Cutler Beckett's appearance provides an important contrast. His clothing is controlled, expensive, and precise. He represents institutional power, and his costume communicates authority without requiring physical intimidation. Beckett does not need to appear dainty, armed with numerous weapons, or physically imposing. His carefully maintained appearance suggests that his power comes from an organized system capable of commanding soldiers, prisons, ships, and commerce. James Norrington demonstrates how costume can show the destruction of status. In the first film, his naval uniform represented discipline and prestige. Dead Man's Chest presents him in a dramatically deteriorated condition. His clothing, hair, and overall appearance communicate his fall before he explains it. The former Commodore now visually belongs closer to the disordered world of Tortuga than the controlled society he once defended. The most ambitious character designs belong to Davy Jones and the crew of the Flying Dutchman. Their appearance combines costume, prosthetic concepts, makeup design, and extensive digital effects. The central idea is gradual transformation. Service aboard the Dutchman does not simply make sailors older. It causes them to merge physically with the ocean. Shells, coral, fish anatomy, marine textures, and other sea life become incorporated into human bodies. Some crew members retain recognizable human features, while others have progressed much further into monstrous forms. This variety makes the curse understandable visually. The audience can look across the crew and imagine the stages through which a newly recruited sailor might eventually pass. Davy Jones represents the most sophisticated expression of this design philosophy. His tentacled face, claw-like hand, unusual leg, weathered clothing, and marine textures make him appear inseparable from the sea. Yet remnants of a captain's clothing remain visible. He is simultaneously a man, a sea creature, and the commander of a supernatural vessel. Bootstrap Bill Turner's design is more tragic because enough of his humanity remains visible for Will and the audience to recognize the man beneath the transformation. Marine growth appears to be consuming him gradually. His costume and physical deterioration communicate years of servitude, guilt, and hopelessness. When Will sees his father, the design immediately reveals the terrible future awaiting anyone trapped aboard the Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman itself functions almost like another character. Its set design rejects the romantic elegance normally associated with sailing ships. The vessel appears wet, decayed, organic, and partially consumed by marine life. Wood, ropes, shells, sea growth, and dark surfaces merge together until the ship seems to have risen from the ocean floor. This visual concept reinforces the fate of its crew. The sailors are becoming part of the sea, and the ship appears to be undergoing the same process. The boundary between crew and vessel becomes uncertain. Everything aboard the Dutchman seems trapped in one supernatural ecosystem controlled by Davy Jones. The Black Pearl creates a different atmosphere. Although dark and weathered, it still represents freedom and adventure. Its decks provide familiar spaces for Jack and his crew, and the ship retains the recognizable construction of a pirate vessel. The Pearl can therefore feel like a home even when it is damaged or surrounded by danger. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest uses dialogue as one of its primary tools for balancing adventure, comedy, romance, mythology, and character conflict. Written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, the screenplay continues the verbal style established in The Curse of the Black Pearl, while making the story considerably more complicated. Characters rarely say exactly what they mean. They negotiate, bluff, threaten, flirt, deceive, and deliberately misunderstand one another. This creates a world where conversation can become almost as competitive as sword fighting. Captain Jack Sparrow naturally dominates much of the dialogue. Jack's speech is unpredictable because his thoughts seem to move in several directions simultaneously. He can begin a conversation appearing confused and finish it having manipulated everyone around him. At other times, he sounds confident while clearly having no control over the situation. This uncertainty is fundamental to the character's humor. The screenplay understands that Jack works best when other characters react to him differently. Will often becomes frustrated because he wants direct answers. Elizabeth is increasingly capable of challenging Jack using his own style of manipulation. Gibbs understands enough of Jack's personality to interpret his strange decisions, while enemies such as Beckett and Davy Jones are less interested in participating in his games. Jack's dialogue also reveals how he protects himself emotionally. He frequently turns serious situations into jokes or negotiations. When confronted by death, loyalty, attraction, or responsibility, he often avoids direct emotional language. Humor becomes a defensive mechanism. The screenplay can therefore make Jack entertaining while still suggesting that his constant performance hides genuine fear. Davy Jones receives a completely different style of dialogue. His speech is theatrical, threatening, and filled with the language of bargains, service, debt, and punishment. He speaks like someone who believes every relationship can be reduced to an agreement. This reflects his role as captain of the Flying Dutchman, where sailors exchange years of their existence for temporary escape from death. The conversations between Jack and Jones are particularly effective because both characters understand negotiation. Jack searches constantly for loopholes, while Jones attempts to force him back toward the original agreement. Their exchanges are not simply hero versus villain confrontations. They resemble arguments between two experienced gamblers who know that every word may alter the terms of a deal. The screenplay repeatedly uses contracts and bargains as dramatic devices. Beckett offers Will a deal. Jack attempts to make deals with Jones. Sailors gamble their years of service. Norrington eventually trades the heart of Davy Jones for an opportunity to restore his position. Characters are constantly asking what something is worth and what another person is willing to sacrifice. This language supports the film's larger theme of death. A promise is never merely a promise in Dead Man's Chest. It can become a prison. Jack's earlier bargain gave him the Black Pearl, but eventually placed his freedom and life in danger. The screenplay uses dialogue to remind the audience that past words continue to have consequences. While Turner speaks more directly than Jack because his personality depends on sincerity. He wants clear objectives and believes problems can be solved through determination. His conversations become more complicated after he discovers Bootstrap Bill. Suddenly, Will is forced to operate in a world where love for his father, loyalty to Elizabeth, and his dealings with Jack all demand different choices. The dialogue between Will and Bootstrap is deliberately more emotional than many of Jack's conversations. Their relationship carries years of absence and misunderstanding. Will had formed an image of his father without truly knowing him. Bootstrap, meanwhile, must confront the fact that his son has entered the same dangerous world that destroyed his own freedom. The Liar's Die sequence is one of the screenplay's best examples of dialogue creating action without conventional combat. Characters sit around a table, but the scene has the tension of a duel. Every statement can be truthful or deceptive, and the players gamble years of their lives. Will attempts to learn where Jones keeps the key while Bootstrap tries to prevent his son from sacrificing himself. The game reflects the screenplay as a whole. Dead Man's Chest is filled with characters attempting to determine whether other people are telling the truth. Jack lies so frequently that even truthful statements become suspicious. Elizabeth conceals feelings. Norrington hides his intentions. Beckett speaks politely while threatening lives. Jones offers bargains that sound like opportunities but lead toward enslavement. Elizabeth's dialogue changes noticeably as her character develops. She becomes more confident in verbal confrontations and increasingly willing to manipulate the assumptions of others. The respectable governor's daughter from Port Royal is learning how pirates communicate. She understands that information, attraction, and deception can be used strategically. Her conversations with Jack are especially layered because neither character wants to state exactly what is happening between them. Jack suggests that Elizabeth is more pirate than she admits. Elizabeth challenges the idea that Jack is entirely selfish. Their exchanges function simultaneously as flirtation, argument, and character analysis. This ambiguity becomes important during the climax. Elizabeth's kiss with Jack initially appears to provide an answer to their romantic tension. Instead, the screenplay turns the gesture into a betrayal when she chains him to the mast. The scene works because the dialogue and behavior leading up to it have established that attraction and distrust can exist simultaneously. While witnessing the kiss without understanding the betrayal is an example of dramatic irony. The audience knows more than Will but still does not possess a simple explanation for Elizabeth's feelings. The screenplay deliberately creates emotional uncertainty that cannot be resolved by a single conversation. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest entered the marketplace under very different circumstances from The Curse of the Black Pearl. The first film had needed to convince audiences that a movie inspired by a theme park attraction could become a major adventure. By 2006, that uncertainty had disappeared. Captain Jack Sparrow was internationally recognizable. Johnny Depp's performance had become a cultural phenomenon, and Pirates of the Caribbean was one of Disney's most valuable new properties. The marketing campaign could therefore sell Dead Man's Chest not as an experiment, but as one of the year's major cinematic events. Captain Jack Sparrow naturally became the campaign's most valuable promotional asset. Posters, trailers, television advertisements, magazine coverage, merchandise, and publicity frequently placed Johnny Depp at the center. Jack's costume alone had become instantly recognizable. The hat, dreadlocks, beads, weathered clothing, eyeliner, and eccentric expressions allowed promotional material to communicate the pirate's identity before audiences even read the title. However, the campaign also needed to demonstrate that the sequel offered something audiences had not already seen. Davy Jones and the supernatural world surrounding him became essential to that strategy. Promotional material emphasized the strange appearance of the Flying Dutchman crew, the threat of the Kraken, dangerous ocean environments, and the darker mythology connected to Jack's past. The theatrical trailers presented the film as both familiar and larger. Audiences could see Jack, Turner, Elizabeth Swann, the Black Pearl, sword-fighting, tropical locations, and pirate comedy, but these familiar elements were surrounded by new threats. The central marketing promise was expansion. Everything that had worked in the first film would return, but the danger, mythology, action, and visual effects would become more spectacular. Davy Jones was particularly effective as a marketing image because his appearance immediately generated curiosity. His tentacled face was visually unlike the human villains audiences might expect from a traditional pirate adventure. Even without understanding his history, viewers could recognize that the sequel was moving deeper into supernatural fantasy. The Kraken was handled with greater mystery. Trailers could suggest its enormous scale through tentacles, destruction, terrified sailors, and violent movement without explaining every detail. This preserved the theatrical impact of seeing the creature while still giving audiences a clear reason to expect larger action sequences. Posters played an important role in reinforcing the franchise identity. The familiar skull imagery, pirate weapons, dark ocean colors, ships, and central characters connected the sequel directly to the first movie. Character-focused promotional images could also take advantage of the popularity of Depp, Orlando Bloom, and Keira Knightley. The title itself was useful marketing. Dead Man's Chest immediately suggested buried treasure and classic pirate mythology while also referring to the supernatural heart of Davy Jones. Before audiences understood the literal meaning of the chest, the phrase already sounded like something belonging to an old pirate legend. Disney also benefited from the unusual relationship between the films and the Pirates of the Caribbean theme park attraction. Unlike most blockbuster adaptations, the source was already part of Disney's entertainment identity. The movies and attraction could reinforce one another. Guests familiar with the ride could recognize ideas adapted for the screen, while movie audiences increasingly associated the attraction with Jack Sparrow and the cinematic universe. The growing popularity of the films eventually encouraged stronger integration between the movie characters and versions of the attraction. This demonstrated the extraordinary strength of the screen franchise. The adaptation had become so culturally dominant that it could influence how audiences experienced the original property that inspired it. Merchandising dramatically expanded the promotional reach of Dead Man's Chest. Toys, action figures, costumes, games, posters, books, collectibles, accessories, and replicas placed the movie's imagery in stores and homes. The franchise was especially suitable for merchandise because it contained so many recognizable objects and characters. Jack's hat, sword, compass, pirate clothing, the Black Pearl, Davy Jones, the Flying Dutchman, the chest, and the key could all become products. Children's merchandise could emphasize adventure and comedy, while more detailed collectibles could target older fans. Halloween costumes were particularly valuable because Jack Sparrow's appearance was distinctive and relatively easy for audiences to imitate. Video games offered another promotional channel. Interactive Pirates products allowed players to continue engaging with the universe after seeing the film. Games could reproduce sword fighting, sailing, characters, locations, and supernatural enemies, transforming spectators into participants within the fantasy. Publishing also supported the franchise through books and related material. Younger audiences could encounter adapted stories and character-focused products, while magazines and entertainment publications provided extensive coverage of the cast, production, visual effects, and enormous scale of the sequel. Johnny Depp's unusual position within the campaign deserves special attention. He was not marketed like a conventional muscular action star. The attraction came from personality. Jack could appear frightened, confused, dishonest, or ridiculous and still dominate promotional material. This gave Disney a protagonist who could sell comedy and action simultaneously. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest occupies an unusual position within the adventure genre because it combines several traditions that normally belong to different kinds of films. It is simultaneously a pirate adventure, supernatural fantasy, romantic comedy, monster movie, treasure hunt, and middle chapter of a larger trilogy. Comparing it with The Curse of the Black Pearl, at World's End, older pirate films and other fantasy blockbusters reveals how Gore Verbinski developed a distinctive style that made the pirate series different from most adventure franchises of its era. The most obvious comparison is with The Curse of the Black Pearl. The first movie has a relatively clean narrative structure. Elizabeth Swann is kidnapped, while Turner joins Jack Sparrow to rescue her. Barbossa and his crew seek to break their curse, and the major characters eventually converge for a final confrontation. Although supernatural mythology is important, the story remains easy to follow because most characters are moving toward closely connected objectives. Dead Man's Chest deliberately abandons that simplicity. Jack wants to escape his debt to Davy Jones. Will initially wants to save Elizabeth, but later becomes determined to free his father. Elizabeth searches for Will while becoming increasingly fascinated by Jack. Norrington wants to recover his reputation. Beckett wants control over Jack's compass and eventually Davy Jones. Jones wants Jack to honor their bargain. The heart inside the chest becomes the object connecting these competing ambitions. This makes the sequel less immediately accessible, but also more unpredictable. In the first film, audiences generally understand which characters will cooperate during the climax. In Dead Man's Chest, alliances can change within a single sequence. Jack, Will, and Norrington may fight one another even though none functions as a traditional villain. The story becomes a competition between different forms of self-interest. The tone is also darker. The Curse of the Black Pearl contains undead pirates and horror imagery, but its central adventure retains a romantic quality. Dead Man's Chest introduces stronger themes of death, emotional corruption, imprisonment, and unavoidable consequence. Jack is no longer pursuing a ship or treasure. He is attempting to prevent his own death. Davy Jones is fundamentally different from Barbossa. Barbossa is a charismatic pirate captain whose supernatural condition has robbed him of ordinary human pleasures. He wants to become mortal again. Jones has moved in the opposite direction. Emotional suffering caused him to reject his humanity by removing his heart. Barbossa seeks restoration, while Jones has transformed pain into cruelty. The villains therefore represent different versions of the franchise's supernatural mythology. Barbossa's curse comes from stolen treasure and greed, connecting him with traditional pirate legends. Jones belongs to something closer to maritime folklore. His ghostly ship, immortal crew, bargains with dying sailors, and control over the Kraken make him feel like an ancient force of the sea. Dead Man's Chest can also be compared with At World's End. The second and third films function almost as two halves of one enormous story, but their scale is different. Dead Man's Chest remains focused largely on individual survival and personal objectives. At World's End expands the conflict into a war involving the East India Trading Company, pirate society, supernatural forces, and the future of piracy itself. This difference gives Dead Man's Chest a somewhat more intimate emotional center despite its enormous action scenes. Jack fears death. Will wants to save his father. Elizabeth struggles with conflicting desires. Norrington wants his life back. The third movie transforms many of these personal conflicts into political and mythological consequences. Compared with traditional pirate cinema, Dead Man's Chest is far more openly fantastical. Classic Hollywood pirate adventures often centered on naval battles, buried treasure, sword fighting, romance, mutiny, and historical conflict. The Pirates franchise retains all of those ingredients but adds the structure of modern fantasy filmmaking. Magical objects have rules, supernatural creatures possess elaborate histories, and characters travel through a world where mythology can physically intervene in ordinary life. The movie nevertheless maintains connections with older adventure cinema through physical action. Sword fights are not treated simply as violent confrontations. They are opportunities for movement, comedy, and changing geography. The giant water wheel sequence is a perfect example. Jack, Will, and Norrington continue fighting while the environment itself becomes unstable. This approach recalls the tradition of physical comedy in classic adventure filmmaking, where props and locations become active participants in action scenes. Verbinski repeatedly constructs sequences around escalating complications. A simple escape becomes a chase involving suspended cages. A sword fight becomes a rolling wheel battle. A ship attack becomes a confrontation with an enormous creature. This distinguishes Dead Man's Chest from many modern action films that rely primarily on rapid editing to create intensity. Verbinski often wants audiences to understand the physical joke. Wide framing allows viewers to see where characters are positioned and how one action causes another. The comedy depends upon geography. The film can also be compared with fantasy franchises such as The Lord of the Rings. Both create extensive mythologies and combine practical environments with major digital effects, but their attitudes toward heroism are dramatically different. The Lord of the Rings frequently treats sacrifice, friendship, and destiny with sincerity. Pirates of the Caribbean constantly undermines heroic seriousness with selfishness, misunderstandings, and jokes. Jack Sparrow is particularly different from the traditional fantasy hero. He does not want to save civilization or fulfill a destiny. For most of Dead Man's Chest, he simply wants to remain alive and free. Even when he performs a heroic action, he usually resists admitting that heroism motivated him.